Hello everyone, welcome back to the Marshal. I am so sorry that I haven't been uploading for the last couple of weeks, I suppose. But yeah, I've been on vacation, I've been sick, and I've been busy with homework. I'm in school, so at the moment, so yeah. But let's watch another video. This one, the final one from the Great Northern War series, the Battle of Gangut in 1714. I gotta admit, I don't really know much about this particular battle. I do know a bit. I will say I'm quite good on the Great Northern War generally, but this one I'm not really that familiar with, to be honest. So whatever. Let's watch this video.
The Great Northern War is a conflict famous for its epic, monumental battles with exciting tactics and charismatic commanders. In contrast, the final phase of the war was a grueling slog between an empire that refused to let go of its golden age and an empire anxious to enter the global stage. Would the stubborn soldier king conjure up another miracle and save his country? Or would his obsession with winning ultimately lead to Sweden's and his own demise? Luckily, your own...
I would say at this point, he's done for. The Swedish Empire is done for. There's not really much more you can do. After the disaster in Russia, plus the Battle of Gardebusch, which basically lost him, which at this point they're beginning to lose all their German territories. Yeah, I think they're pretty much done at this point. I don't really... But he still kept going. And it didn't really go all that well. Let's just say that. And Poland is just completely lost at this point.
Rise to glory is easier
and
to
I'm
achieve
just gonna
thanks to the sponsor
skip
of this
this.
video, Manscaped Deliveries. Go to manscaped.com/kings for 20% off plus free international shipping. With Sweden's final great continental army neutralized, Peter I of Russia was finally able to retire to his new capital and enjoy his favorite pastime, the navy. The commander of the Russian army in Germany, Menshikov, had no time to celebrate after his victory. He besieged Sweden's 3 strongholds once again, and extorted a large sum of money from the city of Hamburg as punishment for aiding the Swedes. The Tsar would use that money to purchase several state-of-the-art ships from the Dutch. Even though he was winning on all fronts, Peter wished to make peace as soon as possible. Continuous wars had a devastating effect on Russia, and the threat of a new war with the Ottomans was looming. To his joy, however, Charles had been arrested by the Sultan for conspiracy, and Crimean raids were becoming increasingly rare. This allowed him to focus on Sweden's final frontier, Finland.
And what happened in Bender, where Charles XII was just an incredible, imagine just a couple of Swedish soldiers just refusing to give up and led by their own king. At one point, I'm pretty sure he fought himself during the battle. They fought in a house and kept the Turkish away from them as much as possible and fought them back constantly. At one point, I think he stabbed 3 guys. The king himself stabbed 3 Ottoman soldiers in one thrust. He just cut through 3 people. It's insane what happened. The Turkish were forced to literally go on the roof and burn it. I think that's what they did to get them out of there. And while they tried actually to go to another house to keep on fighting, however, they were surrounded and forced to give up. And it's around this time where he decides to go home.
With new troops and resources, Admiral Apraxin was able to swiftly advance into southern Finland. The new Russian navy played a pivotal role during the Finnish campaign, as supply shortages were the main cause of Russian failures there after the capture of Viborg. Peter refused to risk the expensive Dutch ships of the line for such operations, instead opting to use the much larger and easily replaceable galley fleet. By transporting his men behind the Swedish army, Peter was able to force General Liebecker to retreat several times, until he was finally replaced by a more capable commander. On the 8th of May 1713, a large Russian army was able to land near Helsinki. The Swedes, now under the command of Armfeldt, managed to defend the city for some time. In the end, the size of the Russian army proved to be too much for the small Swedish force, and Armfeldt ordered a retreat to Porvoo, though not before burning Helsinki and all of its supplies. In September,
yes, this period was known as, I don't know what it's called in Finnish, but it was known as a devastating period for the Finns. Constant raids by the Russians and destroying their cities. And Peter went in with a completely different tactic. He always kept his army close to the navy and always kept it, how can you say, like, along the coastline, which allowed him to always supply his army. So we didn't really go as far in here, but they went very far here in along the coastline. They will also capture Åland eventually.
The Russian army captured Turku, thereby securing the entire southern coast of Finland. Around the same time, one of Sweden's strongholds in Pomerania, Stettin, fell as well. The city was immediately given to the Prussians, who did not have to fire a single bullet in the conflict. Stralsund and Wismar still held strong, however the Allied noose was tightening around them. At this point, the Swedish government in Stockholm did not view Finland as an important theatre in the war. Therefore, very little was done to combat the Russian fleet's dominance in the area, and Armfeldt had to rely only on local recruits for his small army. After the fall of Turku, Armfeldt placed his army in a defensive position near the next great Finnish city on the Russian warpath, Tampere. In October, he faced a 5 times larger Russian army at the Battle of Pelikkene. Although the Finnish army was defeated and lost most of its artillery, they managed to retreat with minimal casualties. The two armies met once again at Napue in February 1714. This time around, the Finnish army was decisively defeated. Armfeldt retreated with the remnants of his army to Sweden proper, leaving Finland at the mercy of the Russian occupier.
And again, constant raids happened around this. They didn't really kill civilians, but I'm pretty sure they didn't really kill civilians all that much, but they did plunder a lot, taking supplies, that kind of stuff. I read about a family forced to flee from the house because the Russians were there. So yeah, it was a devastating period in Finland. If for some reason a Finnish is watching this, please comment below what you called it. I'm pretty sure you called this in Finland something special. Please comment it down below, this period, whatever it was called, something like devastating period in Finland. I don't remember the exact name, but please comment it below if you're watching this.
Peter had absolutely no ambition of conquering Finland and viewed it merely as a bargaining chip to be used to strengthen his position at the negotiating table once the Swedes were actually willing to negotiate. Until then, the land would be thoroughly ravaged in what became known as the Greater Wrath or the Great Hatred. Until the end of the war,
oh, I got the answer there, I guess.
Russian soldiers.
By the way, I haven't watched this video. It's not because I predicted that. Just to be sure about that.
Would commit innumerable atrocities in Finland. Looting, rape, torture, and murder were widespread, and a large number of Finns were forced to move inland. The Finns also engaged in guerrilla warfare, prompting further retaliation from the Russians. Thousands of men were taken as slaves to St. Petersburg to be used as forced labor in Peter's dockyards or on his many architectural projects. Many children were taken from their homes as well to be used as future soldiers and sailors. The plague had also struck Finland during the occupation, further devastating the area.
It was a major plague outbreak in 1710 and 1710 and 1711. Denmark actually handled it pretty well. We were able to pretty quickly adapt to what happened, and the king was forced to move away from Copenhagen for a bit of time, but we were able to seal it off in major cities and not really allow it to spread all that much. But yeah, Poland on the other hand, I think they were really devastated because both the Civil War going on there, and yeah.
As in Finland, the Russians were at Sweden's doorstep, the ruling council finally decided to ramp up their efforts in the eastern Baltic. A strong Swedish navy under Admiral Vatrang was finally sent to Finland. With their navy unable to enter the Gulf of Bothnia, Russian troops in the areas north of Turku began suffering from supply shortages. The land-based supply routes were slow and insecure, forcing the Russians to divert further resources to the area, resources that Peter would have wanted to use elsewhere.
That's what I was talking about. The fleet was important for the supply of the army, so if they couldn't supply it, then the army was in big trouble.
In spring, the Russians finally decided to try to sail by the coast of western Finland. However, a small Swedish force sank most of their ships. In May, Vatrang sailed towards Revel to see if he could capture the city. Upon seeing the improved coastal batteries in the area and several Russian ships of the line moored in the port, he decided that it would be foolish to attempt any kind of assault on the city. Meanwhile, Apraxin sailed from Kronstadt with a large fleet, hoping to tempt Vatrang into a naval encounter in the shallow coastal seas. The two navies met near Cape Hanko on the 29th of June. Although numerically superior, the Russians had far weaker ships than their Swedish counterparts, and their sailors were less experienced. Knowing that his galleys would be decimated in the open sea, Apraxin withdrew all of his ships east of the peninsula, where he awaited further reinforcements from Helsinki. He also informed Peter, who was in Revel, of the situation, and requested that he bring all of the Russian ships of the line with him. Peter joined Apraxin on the 20th of July. However, he deemed the odds too unfavorable to bring his new ships. Galleys had one specific advantage in shallow seas compared to ships of the line. They depended on rowing and could move even when there was no wind. As Golitsyn and his men were now suffering from severe supply troubles, it was imperative for the Russian fleet to reach Turku as soon as possible. Peter's initial idea was to transport the galleys over the Hanko Isthmus. This idea was abandoned after a few days, as the task was time-consuming and the ships were severely damaged. Vatrang was unaware that the Russian plan had failed, and sent a detachment of 10 ships under Rear Admiral Ehrenhold to the north of the peninsula. The rest of the Swedish fleet sailed towards the Russian force. Unfortunately for Vatrang, the weather calmed down on the 26th, and his wind-dependent ships of the line could not move further than Hanko. Peter realized what kind of an opportunity had just presented itself, and he sent a vanguard of several ships to bypass Vatrang's fleet and engage Ehrenhold. Fearing that the rest of the Russian galleys would catch his ships in the shallow coastal waters, Vatrang sailed south, allowing the opposing forces to pass without any resistance. Ehrenhold, also unable to move, was caught by the large Russian fleet. Apraxin initially tried to convince him to surrender without a fight. Ehrenhold refused, telling the envoys, "The king did not give me command of these ships so that I would surrender them without a fight. The Tsar can expect nothing from me and my subordinates other than strong resistance."
Brave fellow, but I don't really think that he's gonna survive this. But on the other hand, they did say that the Russian ships, smaller, they were gallows. Maybe these ships are bigger, perhaps. The Swedish have. Perhaps it's a bit more equal than it seems, but I don't think they're gonna win, the Swedish.
The Swedish fleet consisted of 1 pram, 6 galleys and 2 skerry boats. The ships were arrayed in a semi-crescent in between 2 islands, with the pram in the center and 3 galleys on each side, while the skerry boats were placed behind the line and did not engage in the battle. Apraxin had 98 ships under him, mostly galleys and half-galleys. Only around a quarter of that number would actually engage in the battle. 11 ships in the center, 6 on each flank, and 4 small ones would later attack from behind. The battle started on the morning of the 27th.
He's planning to attack them head-on while these small ships go around and attack them from behind.
Artillery barrages from both sides. The artillery duel was in no way decisive. with ships on both sides sustaining only minimal damage. The Swedish ships carried superior artillery compared to their Russian counterparts. Due to their numbers, the Russians would have won even during a prolonged artillery battle, though with far heavier casualties. With the smoke from the artillery providing cover, the Russian fleet advanced simultaneously towards the Swedish line. This had two effects. The Swedish boats would not be able to concentrate their fire as effectively, and the Russian ships would decisively outnumber the Swedish ones. All 11 ships in the Russian center were ordered to advance towards the Swedish pram, called Elephant. Not only was that ship of the line the biggest threat to the Russian fleet, but Peter also wanted to capture it for his own collection. As the Russian ships were
maybe that's a bad idea to attack the strongest ship of all, just because you want it in a collection, but I get it, it's also the most dangerous. So maybe taking out immediately while you have as many ships as possible, maybe that's a good idea, I guess, but yeah, I don't know. Let's see how it plays out.
Approaching, the Russian soldiers and sailors fired at the Swedes with their rifles. The Swedes, who were already heavily outnumbered, could not even mount a proper defense due to relentless incoming fire. The Russian troops began boarding the Swedish ships, and fierce close quarters.
It seems that it isn't really a battle of experience anymore. It's just overwhelming. The Swedish, I think, are more experienced than the Russians, but it's just overwhelming. There's just so many Russians. They cannot really defend it anymore. They cannot really hold their ground because there's just so many now. They've really been cornered, the Swedish.
Combat ensued. The Swedes fought bravely. However, it was only a matter of time until Russian numbers overwhelmed them. To Arinhold's surprise, 4 Russian gunboats went through a narrow passage between the island on their left and the mainland. Those gunboats subsequently attacked the Swedish galleys on the left and captured or sank all of them. The Swedish galleys on the right fell one by one as well, with only the Elephant still resisting. After a fire broke out on the Elephant, Arinhold was captured and the ship was taken over by the Russians. In the end, the Swedish lost all of their ships and men, while the Russian casualties amounted to several hundred men. Though the battle had little to no effect on the Swedish navy, its implications were substantially foreboding. The Russians would now be able to launch devastating raids into Sweden, and the numerically inferior Swedish navy could do little to nothing about it. Indeed, the Åland archipelago was captured later that year, and Umeå was sacked.
So now it's going to Sweden itself. It's really becoming it's really being desperate now. They have lost most of Finland, and now they are being attacked on all fronts. Åland is captured, and that is where the Swedish and Russians are gonna meet, because Åland has been devastated by the Russians. There are not really a lot of towns there, so it's a perfect place if you don't want spies to check. And there are a lot of spies between the different nations, all with their own different interests. So having a little island where nobody can get to practically, that's a very good idea when you want to make negotiations.
Trang retreated with his fleet to Sweden. However, his failing health prevented him from taking any initiative in the following years. The Swedish defeat caused a sense of panic in Stockholm, and the nobility felt that now it would only be a matter of time before the Russians struck at the capital. Having no other alternative, the Swedish Council of State sent a letter to Charles, informing him that they would start negotiations towards an achievable peace with the coalition unless he returned as quickly as possible. With the Sultan's appetite for war diminished, Charles made an obvious choice. Charles was now determined to reach his homeland, and he rode through Europe at a tremendous speed. He reached Stralsund in November, only 2 weeks after leaving Istanbul. In the following months, Charles started looking for new allies against the coalition. Frederick Wilhelm of Prussia was willing to join the war on Sweden's side in exchange for having Stettin recognized as his own. This did not go well with Charles's no-inch lost doctrine, so he refused. Prussia would enter the war against...
He's too stubborn. He's too stubborn. Like, he doesn't stop. He just keeps on going. On one hand, I admire that kind of determination. I think it's kind of cool, I guess. he's really a guy who's just, I want it my way and no other way. No compromise whatsoever. But logically, it just doesn't make sense. He's too stubborn. He's too arrogant.
Sweden in 1715, the same year as Hanover did.
So now these two, Prussia, Brandenburg, Prussia, under Frederick William the First. The first. He's the father, I think, of Frederick II, the Great, as he's known. Brandenburg, Prussia is of course a very militarized nation. You know, it's this time where they're beginning to make their very strong army, centrally funded, and Hanover. It's only Hanover who has joined the war. The King of Hanover, George I, has just been elected King of England after, King of Great Britain after, I think it was Queen Anne that died. So he was made the new king. But he's also the, elector of Hanover. So, and he, and it's only Hanover, so Britain isn't really involved yet, directly, but it does help that they have, that one of their allies has a nation with the greatest navy in the world. It does kind of help them in that sense. It gives them some diplomatic leverage, and they can transfer ships from Britain. So yeah, and it's around this time where the coalition slowly begins to split up. Denmark, Hanover becomes one portion, I guess you can say, while Brandenburg, Prussia, and Russia become like their own faction in the coalition, while Augustus II, who is always opportunistic, he kind of is between those two. And it's because now they're beginning to fear Russia. Russia is becoming very great through this war. So they're beginning, so Great Britain and Denmark fear that it's gonna upset the balance, if you get what I mean.
In November 1715, a combined Danish-Saxon-Prussian army landed on the island of Rügen. Charles's attempt to stop their advance failed, and he was forced to return to Stralsund. The king's presence may have encouraged his men to continue their stalwart defense, yet the fall of the city was inevitable. With Stralsund surrounded on all sides, Charles left for Sweden on the 22nd of December, merely 2 days before the city fell. 15 years and 3 months after his departure, Charles was finally on the soil of his homeland. This left Sweden with only Wismar on the continent. However, the city fell in 1716 too. Bremen-Verden was partially occupied by Denmark and partially by Hanover. However, George I gained all of it after paying a substantial sum to the Danish king. In 1716, the Allied powers gathered their fleets in Copenhagen and planned a massive assault on the Swedish mainland, with Peter as its commander. Frederick IV of Denmark.
Yes, he visited Denmark, Peter the Great. The invasion never came to anything because they couldn't agree on anything. Peter the Great was very rude. He went into an inn, I suppose you call it in English, and basically was really rude, just doing things that you are not really supposed to do when you are a nobleman. And he really insulted the Danish king.
Grew suspicious of Peter's Baltic ambitions, however, refusing to partake in any future actions. Frustrated at this lack of trust between allies, Peter called off the invasion. The loss of Sweden's last holdings on the continent gave both the people and the nobility hope that the war would finally end. Nevertheless, Charles was still determined to continue fighting. More war meant more men and more money, yet Sweden was devastated. Half the farmland was not cultivated because there were no laborers. Fisheries were abandoned. Foreign trade was ruined by the blockade of the Allied fleets. The fact that Charles was able to continue the war in spite of all this seems like nothing short of a miracle. This was only possible due to the appearance of Juri Heinrich von Goetz as Charles's advisor. His administrative skill allowed Charles to raise another army, though his brutal methods only caused further dissent within the kingdom. Guech also used the distrust among the allies to strengthen Sweden's diplomatic position. By playing George I and Peter against each other, Charles received several relatively favourable separate peace offers. This would have allowed
what I'm talking about. They're beginning to split up because Great Britain's afraid that Russia is becoming too powerful in all this.
Charles to focus on recovering his Pomeranian possessions. Guech continuously tried to convince Charles to accept peace with Russia, in what can only be described as a Sisyphean task. To his credit, he did manage to wear down the stubborn king to accept the loss of Karelia and Ingria. Charles invaded Norway in 1716 in order to knock Denmark out of the war. However, the campaign was slow and costly. Finally, it would all be for naught, as on the 30th of November 1718,
he invaded it 2 times actually, Norway.
Charles was
He invaded it and then retreated because of a naval. I think it was because of a naval defeat or something. And then he returned back. That's why there was such a huge skip from winter to autumn. From 1716 to 1718.
Charles was shot in the head and killed while besieging Frederikshamn. Whether it was a bullet from the Norwegian defenders or from one of his own men is still a matter of intense debate, as both are distinct possibilities. The beleaguered Swedish army then returned to Sweden with their king's body. While crossing the Scandinavian mountains, thousands would die due to cold and starvation. The last hope of reviving the Swedish Empire died along with Charles.
I would say it died before that. I love Charles XII. He's one of my favorite monarchs ever. But I would say it didn't. The Swedish Empire died in Russia. That's why it died, I think.
As Charles neither married nor sired any offspring, he was succeeded by his sister, Ulrika Eleonora. She decided to renounce her absolute powers, and a period of parliamentary rule in Sweden would ensue. With his protector now dead, Guech was also imprisoned and executed. Ulrika Eleonora would abdicate in 1720 in favour of her husband, Frederick of Hesse, who held virtually no power. In late 17...
Yes, that was a deal. The second Charles XII died, he got rid of all of his opponents and basically made an agreement with the parliament that it would become a constitutional monarchy with limited power for the monarch, or at least less power for the monarchy, in exchange for he becoming king. I'm pretty sure that was the deal he made.
1719 and early 1720, Sweden signed the Treaties of Stockholm with Hanover and Prussia. Sweden ceded Bremen-Verden to Hanover and Stettin to Prussia. In the summer of 1720, Sweden and Denmark signed the Treaty of Frederiksborg, according to which Sweden would regain Wismar and Stralsund, while also losing their exemption from the Sound toll and paying war reparations to Denmark. Denmark would also gain part of Holstein-Gottorp. Saxony, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Sweden did not sign any peace treaty. Instead, they renewed the Treaty of Oliva from 1660.
We did get Holstein, much of Holstein-Gottorp, which basically ceased to be a threat for Denmark ever again. Yeah, but sadly it also contained a lot of Germans, which would lead to 1864, that war. That will happen much later. The Second Schleswig War is also known as.
Few years of the war were fairly quiet. Russian raids around Stockholm and Umeå are the only few exceptions. Though they did not have a profound effect on the war, they made the Swedish Riksdag increase their efforts at achieving peace. The final peace treaty was made at Nystad on the 10th of September 1721. Russia would gain Livonia, Estonia, Ingria, parts of Karelia and Viborg, while Finland would be returned to Sweden, together with 2 million thalers in war reparations.
Now they have basically everything he wanted. He secured St. Petersburg, he has Estonia and Livonia, he has the Baltic Sea at his fingertip pretty much. He's the dominant power. Yeah, and soon he will be emperor.
Sweden was now reduced to merely a regional power, would be gripped by the conflict between the monarchy and the parliament, and revanchism against Russia would dominate its foreign affairs. Poland-Lithuania would lose all semblance of central authority. The once powerful Commonwealth would become a battleground for Europe's empires in the next century.
Of course, I think it's only a little over 20 years from now, the first partition is going to begin. You know, Russia, Austria and Brandenburg. Okay, I think it was 17, isn't it 17, like 1770 or something like that? 1770s, I don't remember the exact date. But of course, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 3 partitions are going to be completely eaten up by these empires. So yeah.
Denmark would enter a period of stability, while Prussia, similarly to Russia, would continue its growth on the European stage. The power vacuum left by Sweden would be filled by the ever-growing Russian Empire, which would dominate European affairs in the coming centuries. The Great Northern War completely changed the balance of power in Europe. Not only that, but it also marks a turning point in European history. Wars would have a European rather than a regional nature, as an increasing number of countries would become involved in each other's affairs and conflicts. We are planning.
I think that's also true for the Austrian War of Succession, I think. I wouldn't say it was only the Great Northern War. And I also think that kind of goes back to the 30 Years' War, I guess. I don't know. You can argue either way, I suppose.
To talk about these wars in the future, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm sorry if I've been a bit sick lately and haven't really been uploading, and sorry if this video comes off as a bit lazy. I suppose I didn't really comment a lot. I'm just a bit tired. I have not really feeling all that well today. But yeah, I'm happy being done with the Great Northern War series. Maybe I'll return if I'm becoming more professional one day. But but that will be in a long time from now, I would say. Yeah. But thank you so much for watching this video. Click that like button below if you want to, and subscribe. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.